Hey friend, Graham here from recordingrevolution.com. Common question I get almost every single week is some variation of this. Graham, should I EQ my virtual instruments? Or should I be EQing my virtual drums or my virtual pianos or my virtual bass guitars or whatever the case? If you're playing some kind of sampled instrument and you're doing it through a plugin, the question comes up, is it already EQ'd? Does it already have the processing it needs? Do I need to touch it? Do I treat it like a normal instrument? If I do, how do I approach it? I literally get this question all the time, and I was literally doing a coaching call with some students, and it came up. I had written it down on my legal pad, and it came up on the live call, and I was like, I got to do a video on this. So let me break this down for you very simply. First of all, you got to understand something about virtual instruments before you know whether or not you should EQ them, and that is that a lot of them already have some processing on them. For example, if you use something like Easy Drummer from Toontrack, right? It's a virtual drummer plugin where they've sampled real drummers playing real drum kits in real rooms with different microphones, with different patterns, and you're able to create drum performances. And those have been mic'd up, run through EQs and compressors and nice preamps. And so what you have is a really good sounding raw drum track to use. Okay, so a lot of them already have some processing on them. That in mind, that doesn't mean you don't EQ them, because guess what? Most professional recordings in any major studio today have EQ and compression and effects on them before it comes time to mix them. Meaning in real life, if we were to mic up a drum kit, if I'm gonna mic up a drum kit, I'm gonna probably put those drum mics through some compression. I'm probably gonna EQ the kick and the snare. I might even EQ the overheads on the way in so that my raw recordings sound better. That's a normal standard practice in real studios. So if I were gonna record drums with a real drummer in a real room, and when I do that, I process on the way in and I still EQ them when it comes time to mix. Why is that? Well, because EQing in the mix isn't always about just shaping the tone of a track to sound different than what it sounded like or to be more enhanced. It's really more about balance. It's really more about getting every track to play nice together. So you could have a killer sounding snare drum on your drum performance, whether it was real or virtual, but if that snare drum is masking the guitar, then it's got to be processed. One of the two or both need to be touched in some way to make room for each other. So if you understand that concept, that really when we're talking about EQing anything, real or fake or sampled or whatever you want to call it, the point isn't to change things, it is to create space and balance and clarity so everything can be heard. Very simple. So what I tell students, and what I would tell you, if you're asking yourself, should I EQ this sampled drum kit or fake piano that was a real piano or organ or whatever it is, I would say when you pull the tracks up alongside everything else, so your real vocals, your real guitars or whatever they are, alongside your virtual drum or virtual piano or whatever, can you hear everything nicely? If you collapse everything to mono, for example, like I would recommend you do when you're making your EQ decisions, can you hear every instrument, including the drums? Do they do what you need them to do in the mix? If yes, they don't need any EQ. If no, they probably need some strategic EQ. At the end of the day, whether it's a virtual instrument or a real instrument should have no bearing on your decision to EQ. It still comes down to whether or not you need EQ on the tracks in the mix to make everything work well together. So my recommendation to you is use real drums or virtual drums. I don't care. I use both and have gotten great results with both. Use real pianos or virtual pianos. I don't care. I've used both and gotten great results with both because you know what? The fans can't tell the difference. But regardless of what you use, when it comes time to mix, ignore the fact that it's virtual and instead ask yourself, does it sound the way it needs to sound? Does it play nice with everything else? Then and then only should you reach for an EQ. If it sounds great, you don't need to EQ everything. Even with real instruments, if it sounds great and plays well and cuts through and does exactly what it needs it to do, I won't reach for an EQ. I don't EQ by default. I only EQ if I need to EQ. So I want to train you to think like that as well with virtual drums. Yes, they might be processed. Yes, they might already have some EQ on them, so they might already play nice. So listen and use your ears. But if they don't play nice, don't let that voice in your head that says, well, they're already processed, make you afraid to process them more. Because remember, real drums are processed on the way in on recording day and on mixing day. It's a common practice. All that matters is how does it sound and does it play nice with everything else. 2 bonus tips for you as I'm thinking about it. If you're talking about virtual drums, let's say Easy Drummer, Superior Drummer, something like that, I'm a huge fan and I recommend you export out the individual tracks from a drum performance and mix that way. So for example, if I'm using Easy Drummer, and I've done videos on the channel using Easy Drummer, once I get the pattern set up and the performance is great, it's really just spitting out a stereo feed out of the plugin. That's not really useful to me. I like to use the settings that can render out the kick drum, the snare drum, the toms, the overhead, the room mics independent of each other, and those plugins will do that. Read the manual, figure out how did those plugins specifically do that, and it'll spit out WAV files for each track, so then you can balance the faders of them the way you want, and then you can EQ the overheads, you can EQ and compress the kick drum, you can do parallel compression, you can treat it like a real drum set. So I would do that for virtual drums every time, and that way you can get rid of the plugin and won't take any processing power as well. And the other bonus tip is virtual pianos. They've gotten better over the years, but a lot of times the one area where they seem to be lacking is ultra, ultra high top end. I find that I have to boost a nice shelf boost on most virtual pianos from 6K onward to 9K to 10K. It just depends on the sample to get that lift of that air that sounds more realistic, like if I put a couple of nice condensers over a real piano. So just a bonus tip there, get that shelf boost on the sample piano if you feel like it's a little dull in comparison to a real piano. And speaking of EQ, I want to give you a little bonus gift. I've got an entire EQ cheat sheet that I think will really help you out. EQ is your most powerful plugin, and you have one included in your software, whatever platform you use to mix and record. You already have a standard EQ, so you don't need to go buy an EQ. You already have one. And if you can understand how to best utilize it, you'll get really, really good mixes. It is where most of your mix comes from, is EQ, honestly. So that being said, there's a lot of things that people get tripped up with EQ. So what I did was put together a 7-step checklist for how I approach EQ. So you have a really simple guide right in front of you. It's like 1 or 2 page PDF that you can download, read through, a couple of tips and tricks, but it's mostly like first do this, then think about this, don't make these EQ mistakes. It's all mapped out in a simple bulleted checklist for you that I would recommend you kind of have as a resource, print it out, put it on your desk where you mix, or keep it on a tablet or your phone when you go to mix. So it'll keep you out of trouble and also help you make the most out of your tracks and get the most out of your EQ moves. So it's a free guide that's a really, really helpful resource that I put together for you. Just go to eqchecklist.com. I'll put the link right here and it's in the description box below. Just go to eqchecklist.com, download the free PDF there as my gift to you. Hopefully it'll help you out when you're making EQ decisions on your virtual instruments or regular tracks as well. Thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing to these videos. I'll see you in another video real soon.